Veteran inherited a junkyard and a dog, until the dog revealed a 200mm World War II depot. You're about to discover an incredible story of courage, loyalty, and a discovery that changed everything. This is the story of Marcus, a war veteran who thought he inherited nothing but scrap metal and responsibility, only to uncover one of the most significant historical finds of the century. If you're ready for this amazing journey, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above the rusted gates of Henderson's salvage yard, its pale blue canvas dotted with clouds that cast shifting shadows across acres of forgotten metal. Marcus Thompson stood at the entrance, his weathered hands gripping the keys that had belonged to his great-uncle Earl, a man he'd met only twice in his 34 years of life. The August heat pressed down on him like a heavy blanket, making his prosthetic leg ache where it met his thigh, a constant reminder of the roadside bomb that had ended his military career in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Behind him, his beat-up Ford pickup truck ticked as the engine cooled, loaded with everything he owned. A duffel bag full of clothes, his discharge papers, a Purple Heart he never looked at, and exactly $847 in his checking account. The inheritance had come at the perfect time, or the worst time, depending on how you looked at it. Marcus had been living in a cramped studio apartment in Billings, working part-time at a hardware store and fighting off the darkness that seemed to follow him home every night. When Earl's lawyer called to inform him about the salvage yard, it felt like either salvation or another burden he wasn't sure he could carry. "Well, Rex, looks like this is home now," Marcus said, glancing down at the German Shepherd mix sitting beside him. The dog wasn't his, not really. Rex had belonged to Earl, and according to the lawyer, the old man had been very specific in his will. The salvage yard and the dog came as a package deal. Take both or get nothing. Marcus had never owned a pet, had barely been able to take care of himself since coming back from overseas. But looking down at Rex's intelligent brown eyes, he felt something stir that he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose, however small. Rex was a magnificent animal, his black and tan coat gleaming despite what must have been months of uncertainty after Earl's sudden heart attack. He was larger than most German shepherds, with a broad chest and alert ears that seemed to catch every sound across the vast yard. What struck Marcus most was the dog's composure. Rex sat perfectly still, watching and waiting, as if he understood the gravity of this moment better than Marcus did. The salvage yard sprawled before them like a metallic graveyard. Acres upon acres of rusted car frames, twisted agricultural equipment, and mountains of scrap iron that caught the sunlight and threw it back in harsh, glinting reflections. Paths wound between the piles like narrow canyons, some barely wide enough for a person to walk through. In the distance, Marcus could make out a small trailer that Earl had used as an office, its aluminum siding dulled by years of Montana weather. As they walked through the gates, Rex immediately took the lead, his nose to the ground, following invisible trails that only he could detect. The dog moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to look back at Marcus as if to say, "This way." Marcus found himself following, his military training kicking in as he surveyed the layout of what was now his property. The yard was larger than it had appeared from the road, easily 20 acres, maybe more, stretching back toward a line of cottonwood trees that marked the banks of a seasonal creek. The smell hit him as they moved deeper into the yard, a mixture of rust, oil, and something else he couldn't quite identify, something organic and earthy, like turned soil after rain. It wasn't unpleasant, just different from anything he'd experienced in the sterile environments of military bases or the confined spaces of his apartment. "Earl sure collected everything, didn't he, boy?" Marcus muttered, stopping beside a pile of what looked like parts from a 1940s tractor. Rex had wandered ahead, disappearing behind a mountain of car doors that had been stacked like metal dominoes. The silence of the place was profound. broken only by the distant hum of traffic on Highway 2 and the occasional call of a meadowlark. Marcus found it both peaceful and unsettling. After years of military discipline and structured days, the vastness and apparent chaos of the salvage yard felt overwhelming. Where did you even begin with something like this? He made his way toward the trailer, stepping carefully around puddles of motor oil and trying not to catch his prosthetic on the uneven ground. The door was unlocked. Apparently, Earl hadn't been worried about thieves way out here. Inside, the trailer was surprisingly organized. A desk covered with neat stacks of invoices, a filing cabinet that looked like it had been purchased sometime in the 1970s, and walls covered with calendars dating back decades, many featuring pictures of classic cars or farm equipment. On the desk, Marcus found a handwritten note with his name on it. Marcus, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably wondering what the hell you've gotten yourself into. This place has been in our family since 1943. Your great-grandfather started it, and it's got more history than you might think. Take care of Rex. He knows things about this place that I never figured out. There's the account at First National with enough to keep you going for 6 months if you're careful. The rest is up to you, Uncle Earl. Below the note was a bank statement showing $8,432 in an account that was now his. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had that morning. Marcus sat in Earl's old office chair, a cracked leather thing that must have been comfortable once, and tried to process the reality of his situation. He owned a salvage yard in the middle of nowhere, Montana, inherited a dog he'd never met, and had absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do next. A sharp bark from outside interrupted his thoughts. Rex's bark wasn't playful. It was insistent, almost urgent. Marcus pushed himself up from the chair, his leg protesting after the long drive, and headed outside. He found Rex standing at the edge of what appeared to be the oldest section of the salvage yard, near the back where the cottonwoods grew thicker, and the afternoon shadows had already begun to gather. The dog was focused on something behind a collection of military surplus vehicles, jeeps mostly, along with what looked like parts of an old army truck. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, making his way over to where Rex stood. The German shepherd looked up at him, then back at the ground, then up again. His tail wasn't wagging, but it wasn't tucked either. He was alert, concentrated, like he was trying to communicate something specific. Marcus had seen working dogs in Afghanistan, and Rex's body language reminded him of those moments when the bomb detection dogs had found something important. Following Rex's gaze, Marcus noticed that the ground here looked different from the rest of the yard. While everywhere else the earth was packed hard from decades of heavy equipment and foot traffic, this area was softer, darker, as if it had been disturbed more recently. Not recently enough to be fresh, but different enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. Rex began to dig, his powerful paws throwing dirt behind him with practiced efficiency. This wasn't random digging. This was purposeful, directed. Within minutes his claws struck something solid with a metallic ring that echoed strangely in the quiet air. Marcus knelt beside the hole, ignoring the protest from his prosthetic, and brushed away the loose soil. What he found made his breath catch in his throat. It was metal, but not rusty like everything else in the yard. This was painted green, military green, with stenciled numbers that were still partially visible. U.S. Army, and below that, 1943. "Jesus, Rex," Marcus whispered. "What did you find?" The dog sat back on his haunches, panting slightly from the exertion, but watching Marcus intently, as if waiting for him to understand something important. Marcus cleared more dirt away, revealing what appeared to be the corner of a wooden crate with metal reinforcement bands. The wood was dark with age, but remarkably well preserved, as if it had been sealed and protected from the elements. As the sun began to set behind the cottonwoods, painting the salvage yard in shades of gold and orange, Marcus sat back on his heels and tried to process what he was looking at. His great-grandfather had started this place in 1943. the same year stenciled on whatever Rex had uncovered. The timing wasn't coincidental. Nothing in Marcus's experience had taught him to believe in coincidences. He looked at Rex, who was still watching him with those intelligent brown eyes, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Whatever was buried here had been waiting for 77 years to be found. And somehow, this dog, Earl's dog, had known exactly where to look. The first chapter of Marcus's new life was ending, as the Montana sky deepened from blue to purple. But he had a feeling that the real story was just beginning. If you're as intrigued as I am about what Marcus and Rex discovered, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because what they're about to uncover will change everything you think you know about this small Montana salvage yard. Standing up and brushing the dirt from his hands, Marcus made a decision. Tomorrow he would dig deeper. Tonight he would read through Earl's files and try to understand what his great-uncle might have known about this place. And Rex, well, Rex would stay close, because the dog clearly understood something about this land that Marcus was only beginning to glimpse. As they walked back toward the trailer in the gathering dusk, Rex suddenly stopped and looked back toward the dig site. His ears pricked forward. For just a moment Marcus could have sworn he heard something, a low metallic sound like settling steel. But when he turned to look, there was nothing but shadows and the whisper of wind through the cottonwood leaves. The second day dawned crisp and clear, with frost covering the highest piles of scrap metal like glittering lace. Marcus had spent a restless night in Earl's small living quarters behind the office, waking every few hours to the sound of Rex pacing outside. The dog hadn't wanted to come inside, preferring to maintain some kind of vigil in the yard, and Marcus hadn't pressed the issue. In the military, you learned to trust the instincts of those around you, whether they walked on 2 legs or 4. He'd also spent hours going through Earl's meticulously kept files, and what he'd found had raised more questions than answers. The salvage yard's official records began in 1943, started by his great-grandfather Thomas Henderson. But the financial records showed regular deposits that seemed too large for a simple scrap operation, especially in the early years. There were also several references to government contracts and material storage fees, but no details about what kind of materials or which government agencies were involved. Most intriguing was a map Marcus had found tucked inside a 1955 calendar. It showed the salvage yard property, but with sections marked off in what appeared to be a grid pattern. Several areas were marked with symbols that meant nothing to Marcus, but one of them was located exactly where Rex had started digging the day before. Now, as morning light slanted across the yard, Marcus stood at the dig site with a proper shovel borrowed from Earl's tool shed, along with Rex, who had been waiting for him like a patient supervisor. The hole from the previous evening looked smaller in daylight, but the corner of the crate was still visible, still bearing those faded military stencils. "All right, boy," Marcus said, plunging the shovel into the soft earth. "Let's see what your old master left for us to find." The digging went faster than he'd expected. The soil here was different, looser and darker than the hard-packed earth in the rest of the yard, as if it had been excavated and refilled at some point in the past. Within an hour, Marcus had uncovered most of one side of what was clearly a large wooden crate, reinforced with metal bands and sealed with what looked like military-grade hardware. But as he cleared away more dirt, he realized this wasn't just one crate. There were others, arranged in what appeared to be orderly rows, extending deeper into the ground. The scope of whatever was buried here was much larger than he'd imagined. Rex had been watching the excavation with intense interest, occasionally moving to different positions around the hole as if he was inspecting Marcus's work. When Marcus paused to wipe sweat from his forehead, the dog suddenly trotted over to a spot about 10 feet away and began pawing at the ground. "Another one?" Marcus asked, following Rex to the new location. Sure enough, a few inches down, his shovel struck wood again. Then Rex moved to another spot and another. Each time, Marcus found evidence of more buried crates, The pattern emerging suggested that whatever was down there was extensive, possibly covering several hundred square feet of the supposedly unused back corner of the salvage yard. By noon, Marcus had partially excavated 5 separate crate locations, each one bearing the same military markings and dating from 1943. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't dealing with a few forgotten boxes, but something much more significant. This was starting to look like a systematic storage operation, something that had been planned and executed with military precision. He was taking a break in the shade of Earl's trailer, sharing a peanut butter sandwich with Rex, when he heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. A dust cloud rose from the direction of the highway, and soon Marcus could make out a white pickup truck with "Big Sky Excavation" painted on the side. The truck pulled up near the office, and out stepped a woman in her 40s with short grey hair and work boots that had clearly seen plenty of use. She approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to construction sites and heavy machinery. "You must be Earl's nephew," she said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I run the excavation company in town. Earl called me a few weeks before he passed, said he might need some digging done, but wanted to wait until you got here." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way Rex immediately went to her side, tail wagging. Apparently, the dog knew Sarah and approved of her. "Marcus Thompson," he replied. "Earl left me some notes, but nothing about excavation work." "What kind of project was he thinking about?" Sarah glanced toward the back of the yard, where Marcus's morning excavation work was visible. "He wasn't specific, just said there might be some old buried items that needed to be properly uncovered. Historical stuff, maybe. He seemed to think it was important, but he wanted someone from the family involved before moving forward." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "Looks like you've already started." Marcus made a quick decision. He needed help, and Earl had apparently trusted this woman enough to contact her before he died. "What I've found so far looks like it might be significant. Military crates from World War II, buried in an organized pattern. I'm not sure what's inside them, but there are more than I can handle on my own." Sarah's expression grew serious. "World War II era. That changes things. If this is an official military cache, there could be legal implications. Historical significance aside, you might be looking at federal jurisdiction issues." "What do you mean?" "Well, if the army buried something here during the war and never officially recovered it, it might still technically belong to the government. On the other hand, if your great-grandfather was involved in hiding it, there could be other considerations. Either way, you're going to want to document everything carefully before you go much further." Rex had wandered back toward the dig site and was now standing at the edge of the main hole, looking down at the exposed crate as if he was considering something. Sarah noticed the dog's behavior and frowned. "That's interesting," she said. "Rex has always been an unusual dog, but I've never seen him this focused on anything. Earl used to joke that Rex knew more about this place than he did." "How well did you know Earl?" Marcus asked. "Pretty well. Small town, you know. He was a good customer over the years, had me move some equipment around, dig a few drainage ditches, but he never mentioned anything about buried military crates." Sarah paused. "Though now that I think about it, he did ask some odd questions last time I saw him." "What kind of questions?" "He wanted to know about ground-penetrating radar, whether it could detect buried metal objects, how deep it could see. At the time, I figured he was thinking about upgrading his septic system or looking for old underground storage tanks. But if there's a whole cache of military equipment down there..." Marcus felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. "You think Earl knew what was buried here all along?" "I think Earl knew a lot more than he let on," Sarah replied. "The question is, why didn't he dig it up himself? He had the equipment, the knowledge, and certainly the time over all those years." Rex barked once, sharp and insistent, from his position at the dig site. Both Marcus and Sarah turned to look, and what they saw made them hurry over immediately. The dog was staring down into the hole, but not at the crate Marcus had been excavating. His attention was focused on something else, a corner of metal that had become visible where the morning's digging had caused some of the surrounding dirt to shift and settle. This wasn't part of a wooden crate. This was bare metal, painted the same military green, but curved like part of a much larger structure. As Marcus knelt down for a closer look, he could see that it extended well beyond the boundaries of his excavation. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I think we're looking at something a lot bigger than storage crates." Sarah knelt beside him, her experienced eye assessing what they could see. "This looks like it might be structural, part of a roof or wall, maybe." She looked up at Marcus. "How big did you say this site was?" Marcus pulled out the map he'd found in Earl's files. "Based on this, it could cover several hundred square feet, but if what we're seeing here is part of a larger structure, then we might be looking at an underground facility," Sarah finished. "A bunker, maybe, or a storage depot." As if responding to their conversation, Rex moved to another spot about 20 feet away and began pawing at the ground again. This time, when Marcus investigated, he found not wood or metal, but concrete, a corner of what appeared to be a foundation or wall. The scope of their discovery was expanding by the hour, and Marcus was beginning to understand why Earl might have hesitated to investigate this on his own. Whatever was buried beneath Henderson's salvage yard wasn't just a few forgotten military supplies. This was looking more and more like a complete installation, something that had been deliberately hidden and then apparently forgotten by everyone except an old man and his remarkably intelligent dog. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the excavation site, Marcus made another decision. He was going to need professional help, legal advice, and probably federal notification. But first, he wanted to understand what they were dealing with. "Sarah," he said, "how quickly could you get ground-penetrating radar out here?" "Tomorrow morning if you want," she replied. "But Marcus, once we start using GPR and documenting what's down there, you're going to attract attention. Federal attention, probably. Are you ready for that?" Marcus looked at Rex, who was now sitting calmly beside the largest hole, as if his work for the day was complete. The dog had somehow known that this moment would come, had been waiting for someone to finally uncover what had been hidden here for nearly 8 decades. "I spent 3 tours in Afghanistan fighting for this country," Marcus said finally. "If there's something down there that belongs to America's history, then I think we have a responsibility to bring it to light properly." Sarah nodded. "I'll make some calls tonight. We'll start with the radar sweep and see what we're really dealing with. But Marcus, once this gets out, your quiet life in a Montana salvage yard is going to change dramatically." As they packed up for the day, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Rex had been orchestrating this entire discovery. The dog's behavior wasn't random. It was purposeful, as if he'd been waiting for exactly the right person to arrive at exactly the right time. Earl's death, Marcus's inheritance, even his own desperate circumstances that had forced him to accept the salvage yard, it all felt connected in ways he didn't fully understand. That night, as he sat in Earl's trailer with Rex finally resting at his feet, Marcus tried to imagine what his great-grandfather had been involved in during World War II. 1943 had been a crucial year in the war effort, with America fully committed to fighting on multiple fronts. What could have been so important that it required secret burial in a Montana salvage yard? And why had it remained hidden for so long? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the aluminum siding of the trailer and carrying with it the scent of approaching weather. Rex lifted his head, ears alert, and for a moment both man and dog listened to the sounds of the night. Somewhere in the darkness, the buried secrets of Henderson's salvage yard waited patiently for morning, just as they had waited for 77 years. The third day brought Sarah's excavation crew and equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a Montana salvage yard. The ground-penetrating radar unit hummed and clicked as Sarah's technician, a young man named Jake, methodically swept it across the back section of the property. Rex had appointed himself supervisor of the operation, following Jake's every move and occasionally stopping to examine spots that the equipment had flagged as interesting. Marcus stood beside Sarah, watching the laptop screen that displayed the radar's findings in real time. What they were seeing defied his expectations and raised questions that he wasn't sure anyone could answer. "This is incredible," Jake said, pausing the sweep to point at the screen. "Look at this pattern. These aren't random storage caches. This is a complete underground structure. We're looking at what appears to be a series of connected chambers, probably concrete construction, extending at least 40 feet in each direction from our starting point." The radar image showed a complex layout, rectangular chambers connected by what appeared to be corridors, with several larger spaces that could have been storage areas or workrooms. The entire structure seemed to be about 8 feet underground, which explained why it had remained hidden for so long. "The depth is perfect for concealment," Sarah observed. "Deep enough to avoid detection from surface activity, but shallow enough for practical access. Whoever designed this knew what they were doing." Rex had been watching their discussion with interest, and now he trotted over to a spot that the radar had identified as particularly significant. The area showed up on the screen as a large rectangular anomaly with what appeared to be metal reinforcement throughout. "That looks like it might be the main access point," Jake said, following Rex to the location. "There's definitely a concentration of metal there. Could be a stairway or elevator mechanism." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. They weren't just looking at a storage facility anymore. This was starting to look like a genuine military installation, complete with multiple levels and sophisticated access systems. The implications were staggering. "Sarah, we need to stop and think about this carefully," he said. "If this is what it looks like, we're not just dealing with historical artifacts. We might be looking at classified military infrastructure." Sarah nodded, her expression grave. "I was thinking the same thing. Jake, let's finish the sweep and get a complete picture before we go any further." The remainder of the radar survey revealed even more complexity. The underground structure extended well beyond their initial estimates, covering nearly an acre of the salvage yard's back section. There were at least a dozen separate chambers, some small enough to be storage rooms, others large enough to house vehicles or heavy equipment. Most remarkably, the radar detected what appeared to be a separate section with significantly thicker concrete walls and ceiling, possibly designed for storing dangerous materials. When the survey was complete, Marcus, Sarah, and Jake stood looking at a printout that resembled the blueprint for a small underground city. The sophistication of the construction was far beyond anything that should have existed at a rural Montana salvage yard in 1943. "I've seen installations like this before," Marcus said quietly. "In Afghanistan, we encountered some Soviet-era bunkers that had similar layouts. This was built for serious military purposes, not just storage." "What do you think was kept here?" Sarah asked. Before Marcus could answer, Rex began barking, not the excited bark he'd used when discovering the burial sites, but a deeper, more urgent sound. The dog was standing near what the radar had identified as the main access point, and he was staring not at the ground, but at an approaching dust cloud on the horizon. 3 black SUVs were approaching fast down the gravel road, moving with the kind of purpose that Marcus recognized from his military experience. These weren't tourists or curious neighbors. "Shit," Sarah muttered, following his gaze. "That was faster than I expected." "Expected what?" Marcus demanded. "I had to make some calls last night, Marcus. If we're dealing with classified military installations, there are protocols. Agencies that need to be notified." The SUVs pulled up in a neat formation near the salvage yard's main gate, and men in dark suits began emerging. Marcus counted 8 of them, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Rex's barking had shifted to a low, continuous growl, and the dog had positioned himself between Marcus and the approaching agents. The lead agent was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a professional bun and eyes that missed nothing as she surveyed the excavation site. She approached with credentials already in hand. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Agent Catherine Ross, FBI. We understand you've made some discoveries on your property that might be of national security interest." Marcus accepted her credentials, noting that she'd said national security rather than historical. That distinction suggested these people already knew more about what was buried here than he did. "Agent Ross, I inherited this property 3 days ago. I've been trying to understand what my great-grandfather might have been involved with during World War II. If there are federal interests involved, I'm happy to cooperate." Agent Ross studied him for a moment, then glanced at the radar equipment and the excavation site. "Mr. Thompson, what I'm about to tell you is classified information that you're being briefed on due to your ownership of this property and your security clearance from your military service." Marcus was surprised she knew about his clearance, though he supposed he shouldn't have been. "I'm listening." In 1943, your great-grandfather, Thomas Henderson, entered into a classified agreement with the U.S. Army to provide long-term storage for sensitive military materials. The arrangement was part of a broader program to establish secure, off-site storage facilities for strategic resources that couldn't be kept at traditional military bases. She paused, watching his reaction. "The facility beneath this property was designated as Storage Depot 7 Alpha, and according to our records, it was never officially decommissioned. That means whatever is down there is still technically classified." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet, and not just because of the underground chambers. "What kind of materials are we talking about?" "That's classified above your current clearance level. What I can tell you is that the materials stored here were considered vital to national defense, and their security was of the highest priority." Jake had been listening to this conversation with growing alarm. "Are we talking about dangerous materials? Chemical weapons? Radioactive substances?" Agent Ross turned to him with a sharp look. "You are." "Jake Morrison, GPR technician with Big Sky Excavation," Sarah answered for him. "He's been helping with the radar survey." "Mr. Morrison, you'll need to sign a non-disclosure agreement before leaving the property today. Same for you, Ms. Mitchell." Marcus was starting to feel like events were spiraling out of his control. "Agent Ross, I understand the need for security, but this is my property. I have rights here." "Yes, you do," she agreed, "and we're not here to seize your property or interfere with your ownership rights. What we need is your cooperation in safely and securely accessing the storage facility to determine its current status." Rex had stopped growling and was now sitting beside Marcus, but his attention remained fixed on Agent Ross. The dog's assessment of people had been remarkably accurate so far, and his wariness of the federal agents was noted. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked. "We need to open the facility and inventory its contents. If the materials stored there are still viable and secure, they'll need to be relocated to a more appropriate facility. If they've deteriorated or become dangerous, they'll need to be safely disposed of. Either way, once the facility is cleared, ownership of the underground structure reverts to you." It was a reasonable proposal, but Marcus had learned in the military that reasonable proposals from government agents often came with hidden complications. "How long would this process take?" "That depends on what we find down there. Could be days, could be weeks. We'll establish a secure perimeter around the excavation site, and you'll have full access to observe the process, but we'll need to control who else comes and goes from the property." Marcus looked at Sarah and Jake, both of whom appeared to be processing the implications of finding themselves involved in a classified federal operation. Then he looked down at Rex, who was now watching him intently, as if waiting for his decision. "Agent Ross, before I agree to anything, I need to understand something. How did you know about this so quickly? Sarah only made inquiries yesterday. The agent smiled thinly. Mr. Thompson, Storage Depot 7 Alpha has been under passive surveillance since 1943. The moment ground-penetrating radar was used on this property, it triggered monitoring systems that have been in place for decades. The implication was clear. They'd been watched from the moment they'd begun serious excavation. Marcus felt a chill as he realized that his quiet inheritance of a rural salvage yard had probably been noted in federal files within hours of Earl's death. "There's something else you should know," Agent Ross continued. "Your great-uncle Earl was also briefed on the contents of Storage Depot 7 Alpha when he inherited the property from your great-grandfather in 1967. He signed the same non-disclosure agreements we'll be asking you to sign, and he maintained security protocols for over 50 years. Marcus stared at her. "Earl knew what was down there all along?" "Earl Henderson was a patriot who understood the importance of national security. He kept this facility secure and secret for his entire adult life. The question now is whether you're prepared to do the same, or whether it's time for the government to relocate these materials to a more traditional, secure facility." The weight of the decision pressed down on Marcus like the Montana sky. His great-grandfather had made a choice in 1943 that had shaped his family's legacy for generations. Earl had carried that burden for 50 years, alone. Now it was Marcus's turn to decide what happened next. Rex stood up and walked over to the main excavation site, looking down into the hole they'd dug that morning. Then he looked back at Marcus, and in the dog's intelligent eyes, Marcus saw something that looked remarkably like trust. "All right, Agent Ross," Marcus said finally. "Let's open it up and see what's been waiting down there for 77 years. As federal agents began establishing a security perimeter around the dig site, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if he'd just made the best decision of his life, or the worst. But looking at Rex, who had somehow orchestrated this entire discovery, he had the distinct feeling that the dog had known this moment would come and had been preparing for it far longer than any of them realized. The fourth day dawned under a grey sky that seemed to reflect the gravity of what was about to unfold. The salvage yard had been transformed overnight into what looked like a military operation, with temporary structures housing sophisticated equipment and federal agents moving with practiced efficiency around the excavation site. Marcus had barely slept, his mind racing with questions about what they might find beneath the Montana soil. Agent Ross had brought in a team of specialists, archaeologists, explosives experts, hazardous materials technicians, and military historians. The excavation was being conducted with the precision of a surgical operation, with every step documented and every discovery catalogued. Marcus was allowed to observe, but Rex had somehow earned a position as an unofficial member of the team, with several agents commenting on the dog's uncanny ability to anticipate their discoveries. The breakthrough came at approximately 10:30 a.m., when the excavation team uncovered what appeared to be a concrete stairwell descending into the earth. The structure was remarkably well preserved, with only minimal water damage despite nearly 8 decades underground. Stenciled on the concrete walls were military designations and warning symbols that made even the experienced federal agents proceed with extra caution. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Ross called, "would you join us at the access point?" Marcus made his way to the edge of the excavation, where a neat rectangular opening now revealed the top of a stairway leading down into darkness. Portable lighting had been set up, illuminating concrete steps that disappeared into what appeared to be a substantial underground complex. "The air quality checks are good," reported one of the technicians. "No dangerous gases, no radiation above background levels. The ventilation system appears to have functioned effectively, even after all these years." Rex had positioned himself at the top of the stairway, looking down with intense interest, but showing no signs of the anxiety he'd displayed around the federal agents. If anything, the dog seemed excited, as if he recognized something familiar about the underground facility. "Are we going down?" Marcus asked. "In a few minutes," Agent Ross replied. "We're following standard protocols for potentially hazardous environments, but the initial readings suggest the facility is secure." As they waited for final clearance, Marcus found himself studying the construction visible from the stairway entrance. The concrete work was exceptional, military-grade, built to last centuries rather than decades. This wasn't a hastily constructed wartime storage facility. This was architecture designed for permanent installation. "Agent Ross," he said, "you mentioned that this was part of a broader program. How many facilities like this were built?" "That information is classified," she replied automatically, then seemed to reconsider. "What I can tell you is that Storage Depot 7 Alpha was one of the most significant installations in the program. The materials stored here were considered irreplaceable." "Irreplaceable how?" Before she could answer, the lead technician gave the all-clear signal. Agent Ross gestured toward the stairway. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to be the first to enter your family's secret?" Marcus looked at Rex, who immediately started down the stairs, as if he'd been waiting for this invitation his entire life. Taking a deep breath, Marcus followed, with Agent Ross and her team close behind. The stairway descended about 15 feet before opening into a corridor that was far more sophisticated than Marcus had imagined. The walls were lined with what appeared to be steel panels, and overhead fixtures provided efficient lighting powered by some kind of backup electrical system that had apparently remained functional for decades. The air was cool and dry, with a faint metallic scent that wasn't unpleasant. Rex moved confidently down the corridor, pausing at intersections as if he was remembering a familiar route. Marcus followed, amazed by the scope of the underground complex. This wasn't just a storage facility. It was a complete installation with multiple levels and specialized chambers for different purposes. The first room they entered took Marcus's breath away. It was enormous, with a vaulted concrete ceiling at least 20 feet high. But what filled the space was even more impressive, row after row of military vehicles, each one covered with protective tarps and arranged with military precision. Jeeps, trucks, armored vehicles, and equipment that Marcus didn't immediately recognize. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the federal agents. Agent Ross moved to the nearest vehicle and carefully lifted a corner of the protective covering. Beneath was a pristine 1943 Willys MB Jeep, its olive drab paint as fresh as the day it had been manufactured. The preservation was perfect. No rust, no deterioration, as if the vehicle had been frozen in time. "The environmental controls in this facility are remarkable," observed Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the archaeologists on the team. "The temperature and humidity have been maintained at optimal levels for metal preservation." They moved through the facility systematically, discovering chamber after chamber of perfectly preserved military equipment. There were rooms full of weapons still in their original packaging, communications equipment that represented the cutting edge of 1940s technology, and supplies that could have supported a substantial military operation. But it was the fourth chamber they entered that made everyone stop and stare in stunned silence. The room was smaller than the others, with reinforced walls and additional security measures that suggested whatever was stored here was especially valuable. Along the walls stood dozens of metal containers, each one marked with symbols that Marcus recognized from his military experience as indicating precious metals. Agent Ross approached one of the containers and carefully opened it, revealing neat stacks of gold bars, each one stamped with U.S. Treasury markings and dated 1943. The container appeared to hold several hundred pounds of gold bullion. "This is a federal gold reserve," she said quietly. "These were emergency stores established during World War II in case of invasion or economic collapse." Marcus did quick mental calculations as they opened container after container. Each one held gold bars, silver ingots, or other precious metals. The total value was staggering, easily hundreds of millions of dollars at current precious metal prices. "Agent Ross," Marcus said carefully, "what exactly is the government's claim on materials stored on private property?" She turned to look at him, and for the first time since her arrival, her professional composure showed cracks. "Mr. Thompson, that's a very complex legal question. The materials stored here were placed under a federal storage agreement, but the facility was constructed on private land with private funding. The legal ownership might be complicated." Rex had been exploring the room with the gold reserves, and now he was standing beside a wall panel that looked different from the others. When Marcus approached, he could see that it was actually a concealed door, secured with mechanical locks that appeared to require some kind of key or combination. "There's another room," Marcus announced. The federal team gathered around the concealed door, and after some discussion, they decided to open it using specialized tools. What they found beyond made the gold reserves look insignificant by comparison. The final chamber was a vault containing documents, maps, and technological blueprints that appeared to represent some of America's most closely guarded World War II secrets. There were prototype designs for advanced aircraft, detailed plans for weapon systems that were years ahead of anything known to have been deployed, and communication intercepts that suggested intelligence operations of extraordinary scope. "My God," Dr. Kim whispered, carefully examining a set of blueprints. "These are design specifications for jet aircraft that wasn't supposed to exist until the 1950s. Agent Ross was studying a collection of documents with growing alarm. "These are classified at levels that still exist today. Some of this information could impact current national security if it became public." Marcus was beginning to understand the full scope of what his family had been protecting. This wasn't just a storage facility. It was a treasure trove of American military and technological secrets, combined with financial reserves that could fund substantial operations. "Agent Ross," he said, "I think we need to discuss the legal implications of this discovery very carefully." She nodded grimly. "Mr. Thompson, what we've found here is going to require involvement from the highest levels of government. The value of the materials alone, not just financial but historical and strategic, makes this one of the most significant discoveries in decades." Rex had completed his exploration of the final chamber, and now he sat beside Marcus, looking up at him with an expression that seemed remarkably satisfied. The dog had led them to exactly what he'd known they would find, and his job was complete. As the federal team began the enormous task of cataloging and securing the facility's contents, Marcus found himself facing a decision that would define the rest of his life. The materials stored beneath Henderson's salvage yard were worth hundreds of millions of dollars and contained secrets that could rewrite military history. The government would certainly claim ownership of classified materials, but the gold reserves and the facility itself presented more complex legal questions. "Agent Ross," Marcus said as they prepared to leave the underground complex, "what happens now?" "Now, Mr. Thompson, you and I are going to Washington, D.C. There are people who need to hear about this discovery directly, and decisions that need to be made at levels far above my authorization." As they climbed the stairs back to the surface, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 days ago, he'd been a struggling veteran with a prosthetic leg and less than $1,000 to his name. Now he was potentially one of the wealthiest men in America, the guardian of historical secrets that could change everything historians thought they knew about World War II. Rex bounded up the stairs ahead of them, emerging into the late afternoon sunshine with obvious relief. The dog had spent his entire life knowing that something extraordinary was hidden beneath his feet, and now that secret was finally revealed. That evening, as federal agents continued their security operations around the dig site, Marcus sat on the steps of Earl's trailer with Rex beside him, trying to process everything that had happened. The Montana sky was clear and vast, filled with stars that seemed impossibly bright after the artificial lighting of the underground facility. A soft knock on the trailer door interrupted his thoughts. Agent Ross appeared, looking less formal than she had during the day's operations. "Mr. Thompson, may I join you?" Marcus gestured to the step beside him, and she sat down with a slight sigh of exhaustion. "That was quite a day," she said. "Agent Ross, can I ask you something off the record?" "Catherine," she corrected. "And yes, you can ask." "Liggy, how long have you known about Storage Depot 7 Alpha?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, looking out across the salvage yard, where subtle lights marked the federal security perimeter. "I've been the case officer responsible for monitoring this site for 15 years, she said finally. "I knew Earl Henderson personally. Not well, but we communicated occasionally about security protocols. He was a remarkable man who carried an enormous responsibility with dignity and discretion. Why didn't the government just relocate everything years ago? Several reasons. First, the facility was incredibly secure where it was, better than many official government installations. Second, moving materials of this sensitivity and value would have attracted attention that nobody wanted. And third, she paused, smiling slightly. Earl Henderson was probably the most trustworthy person in America. The government knew that as long as he was watching over the depot, it was in good hands. Marcus looked down at Rex, who was resting his head on his paws but keeping his eyes alert for any unusual activity in the darkness around them. "What about Rex? How does a dog know about classified underground facilities?" Catherine laughed softly. "That's the most remarkable part of this whole story, Marcus. Rex isn't just any dog. He's the descendant of a line of German shepherds that have been guarding this site since 1943. Your great-grandfather brought the original pair from a military breeding program, specifically selected for intelligence and loyalty. Earl continued the bloodline, and Rex represents the 4th generation of dogs who have instinctively understood their role as guardians of Storage Depot 7 Alpha. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Rex hadn't just accidentally discovered the buried facility. He was genetically programmed to protect it, the product of a breeding program designed to create the perfect guardian for America's most closely held secrets. "So Rex knew what was down there all along?" "Rex knew his job," Catherine said, "which was to wait for the right person to arrive at the right time, and then guide them to the discovery. Earl trained him for this moment, just as Earl was trained by your great-grandfather." Marcus felt a profound sense of connection to his family history that he'd never experienced before. 3 generations of Hendersons had protected one of America's greatest secrets, and now it was his turn to decide what happened next. "Catherine, what do you think I should do?" "That's not for me to say, Marcus. What I can tell you is that the decision you make will impact not just your own life, but the security and historical legacy of the United States. The materials in that facility represent both enormous wealth and enormous responsibility." As if sensing the gravity of the conversation, Rex lifted his head and looked directly at Marcus. In the dog's intelligent eyes, Marcus saw not just loyalty, but expectation. Rex had fulfilled his genetic programming by guiding Marcus to the discovery. Now it was Marcus's turn to prove worthy of the trust that had been placed in him by 3 generations of his family. The stars overhead seemed to pulse with significance as Marcus contemplated the most important decision of his life. Whatever he chose would honor or betray the legacy of his great-grandfather, the memory of Earl, and the faith that Rex had placed in him by revealing the secret of Storage Depot 7 Alpha. Tomorrow would bring federal officials, legal negotiations, and decisions that would reshape his entire existence. But tonight, sitting under the vast Montana sky with a remarkable dog beside him and the greatest secret in American history revealed beneath his feet, Marcus Thompson finally understood what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. The 5th and final chapter of this extraordinary story began with a phone call that would change everything. Marcus had been in Washington, D.C., For 3 weeks, staying in a government hotel while teams of lawyers, historians, and federal officials worked through the complex legal and security implications of the Storage Depot 7 Alpha discovery. Rex had remained in Montana under the care of Sarah Mitchell, guarding the salvage yard and the ongoing federal operation that had transformed the quiet property into one of the most secure facilities in the American West. The call came from Catherine Ross at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late September. "Marcus, you need to get back to Montana immediately," she said without preamble. "We've made another discovery, and this one changes everything." Marcus was on a military transport flight to Great Falls within 4 hours, his mind racing with possibilities. What could they have found that was more significant than an underground facility filled with gold reserves and classified military secrets? During the flight, he tried to imagine what Rex might have led them to discover now, but nothing he could conceive prepared him for what was waiting. The salvage yard had been transformed beyond recognition during his absence. The federal security perimeter now extended over several acres, and temporary buildings housed what appeared to be a major archaeological operation. But most dramatically, a new excavation site had been established about 100 yards from the original discovery, with earth-moving equipment and specialized drilling rigs working around the clock. Sarah met him at the security checkpoint with Rex, whose enthusiastic greeting suggested the dog had missed him considerably. But even Rex seemed subdued by whatever new discoveries had been made in Marcus's absence. "What did you find?" Marcus asked as they walked toward the new excavation site. "It started about a week after you left for Washington," Sarah explained. Rex began displaying the same focused behavior he'd shown before the first discovery, but this time he was interested in an area much farther back on the property, almost to the tree line. They approached the new dig site, where Marcus could see a concrete structure much larger than the original Storage Depot 7 Alpha. This wasn't just a storage facility. It was a complete underground complex with multiple levels and what appeared to be industrial-grade construction. Catherine Ross emerged from a temporary command post, her expression combining excitement with something that looked like apprehension. "Marcus, welcome back. What we've found here is going to require a complete reassessment of everything we thought we knew about World War II military operations." She led him to an observation platform that provided a clear view into the main excavation. What Marcus saw defied belief. The underground complex was enormous, with concrete walls that descended at least 30 feet below ground level. But more than the size, it was the sophistication of the construction that was breathtaking. This facility had been built with technology and engineering capabilities that seemed far beyond what should have existed in 1943. "This is Storage Depot Alpha Prime," Catherine said. "The facility we found 3 weeks ago was apparently just the tip of the iceberg, literally the surface-level storage for the real installation, which is what we're looking at now." Marcus could see multiple levels connected by sophisticated elevator systems, climate-controlled chambers that appeared designed for long-term habitation, and what looked like manufacturing facilities equipped with machinery that he couldn't identify. Manufacturing facilities? For what? "That's where things get complicated," Catherine replied. "Come with me." They descended into Alpha Prime using a temporary elevator that the federal team had installed for access. The scale of the underground complex became apparent as they moved through corridors that stretched in multiple directions, some extending so far that the portable lighting couldn't illuminate their endpoints. The first level appeared to be administrative, with offices and communication facilities that represented the absolute cutting edge of 1940s technology. But it was the second level that took Marcus's breath away. The chamber they entered was clearly a research and development facility, with laboratories equipped for metallurgy, chemistry, and what appeared to be advanced physics research. Workbenches still held experiments in various stages of completion, and filing cabinets contained research notes that would take teams of scientists months to fully analyze. "Marcus," Catherine said carefully. Some of the research conducted in this facility appears to have been decades ahead of publicly known scientific achievements. We're finding evidence of technological developments that weren't supposed to exist until the 1960s or 1970s. They moved deeper into the complex, discovering manufacturing areas where prototype aircraft components had been produced, materials testing laboratories that showed evidence of advanced metallurgy experiments, and most remarkably, what appeared to be a complete aircraft assembly facility capable of producing vehicles that were far beyond anything known to have flown during World War II. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, staring at partially assembled aircraft that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a 1940s military facility. "The implications are staggering," Catherine agreed. "If this research was as advanced as it appears, it suggests that America's technological capabilities during World War II were far beyond anything that has been publicly acknowledged." Rex had been exploring the facility with the confidence of familiarity, and now he was standing beside what appeared to be a vault door built into the far wall of the assembly area. Unlike the mechanical locks of the upper facility, this door was secured with technology that looked almost modern, electronic components and security systems that should not have existed in the 1940s. "That's the final vault," Catherine said. "We've been waiting for your return before attempting to open it. Whatever is behind that door was secured with the highest level of protection available in this facility." The federal team had brought in specialists in electronic security systems, and it took them several hours to safely bypass the vault's protective mechanisms without potentially damaging whatever was stored inside. When the massive door finally swung open, it revealed a chamber that took everyone's breath away. The vault contained not just documents and plans, but actual working prototypes of technology that seemed impossible for the World War II era. Aircraft engines that operated on principles Marcus didn't recognize, communication devices that appeared to be predecessors to modern satellite technology, and most remarkably, what appeared to be the complete plans and prototype components for weapons systems that were generations ahead of anything known to have been developed during the war. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the lead scientific analyst on the federal team, was carefully examining a set of blueprints with obvious amazement. "These are design specifications for jet propulsion systems that are more advanced than anything we have today. The fuel efficiency calculations alone suggest technological capabilities that we haven't achieved even with modern materials and manufacturing techniques." Marcus found himself staring at a prototype aircraft that looked like it could have been designed yesterday rather than 8 decades ago. The engineering was flawless. The materials appeared to be some kind of advanced composite that wasn't supposed to have been invented until the space age, and the overall design suggested performance capabilities that would have made this aircraft superior to anything in the sky today. "Catherine," he said slowly, "what exactly was the U.S. government doing here in 1943? That's the question that's going to require answers from people far above my security clearance," she replied. "What we're looking at here suggests that America's World War II research and development programs were far more advanced and far more extensive than any official records indicate." As the federal team continued documenting the vault's contents, Marcus found himself thinking about the broader implications of the discovery. If the technology developed here had been publicly acknowledged and implemented, it could have changed the course of not just World War II, but the entire subsequent history of human technological development. "Why was all of this kept secret?" he asked. "Why wasn't this technology used?" Dr. Warren looked up from a set of propulsion system blueprints. "That's the most intriguing question of all. Some of this technology appears to have been fully developed and ready for implementation. There must have been reasons, political, strategic, or perhaps practical, that prevented its deployment. Rex had completed his inspection of the final vault, and now he sat beside Marcus with an expression that seemed remarkably satisfied. The dog had successfully guided them to every significant discovery in the complex, fulfilling a genetic programming that had been passed down through 4 generations of his bloodline. "Catherine," Marcus said, "I need to ask you something directly. What does the government want to do with all of this?" She was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. "Marcus, what we've found here is potentially the most significant archaeological and technological discovery in American history. The historical value alone is incalculable. The technological applications could revolutionize multiple industries. And the strategic implications?" She paused. "Let's just say that there are people in Washington who believe this discovery could impact national security for decades to come. And my property rights? That's where things get complicated. The original storage depot 7 Alpha was clearly established under a federal storage agreement, which might give the government certain claims. But Alpha Prime is a different matter entirely. This facility was built with what appears to be significant private investment and private land ownership. The legal precedents are unclear." Marcus walked to the center of the vault, surrounded by technology and secrets that could change the world. Rex followed, sitting beside him as they both contemplated the magnitude of what had been revealed. "Marcus," Catherine continued, "there's something else you need to know. The discovery of Alpha Prime has attracted attention from the highest levels of government. The president has been briefed, and he's appointed a special commission to determine how to proceed. You're going to be invited to participate in those discussions, but the decisions made will impact far more than just your family's property." The weight of responsibility was enormous, but as Marcus looked around the vault, filled with revolutionary technology and priceless historical artifacts, he realized that this moment had been inevitable from the day Rex first led him to that initial excavation site. His great-grandfather had made a choice in 1943 to protect America's most advanced secrets. Earl had continued that protection for 50 years. Now it was Marcus's turn to decide what legacy he would create. "Catherine, what do you think my great-grandfather would want me to do?" "I think Thomas Henderson was a visionary who understood that some discoveries are too important to be controlled by any single government or individual," she replied. "The question is whether you're prepared to make decisions that will impact not just American history, but potentially human technological development for generations to come." Rex stood up and walked to the vault entrance, looking back at Marcus as if to say that his job was complete. The dog had fulfilled his genetic programming by revealing every secret that had been hidden beneath Henderson's salvage yard. Now it was time for Marcus to prove worthy of the trust that had been placed in him. As evening approached and the federal team prepared to secure the facility for the night, Marcus stood at the edge of the excavation site with Rex beside him, looking out across the Montana landscape that had concealed one of history's greatest secrets for 77 years. The salvage yard that had once seemed like a burden was now revealed to be one of the most significant pieces of real estate in America. The technology hidden beneath his feet could revolutionize transportation, communication, and manufacturing. The historical documents could rewrite textbooks about World War II and American scientific capabilities. But more than that, Marcus realized, the discovery represented something larger. Proof that human ingenuity and vision could achieve remarkable things when guided by the right principles and protected by the right people. His great-grandfather had been a guardian of impossible secrets. Earl had been a protector of national treasures. Rex had been a guide to revolutionary discoveries. Now it was Marcus's turn to become something he'd never imagined possible, a steward of the future itself. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening Montana sky as Marcus made his decision. Whatever came next, negotiations with federal officials, legal battles over property rights, decisions about how to reveal world-changing technology to humanity, he would face it with the same courage and integrity that had defined 3 generations of his family. Rex looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes, and Marcus could have sworn the dog was smiling. Together, they had uncovered secrets that could change everything. Now together, they would help decide what the future would look like. The story that had begun with a struggling veteran inheriting a junkyard and a dog had become something far greater. A tale of discovery, responsibility, and the power of loyalty across generations. And as Marcus Thompson stood guard over one of humanity's greatest treasures, he knew that the most important chapters were still to be written. If this incredible journey has amazed you as much as it amazed me, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stories like Marcus and Rex's remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are hidden in the most ordinary places, waiting for exactly the right person to find them at exactly the right time. Make sure you hit that notification bell, because we have more incredible true stories coming your way that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about history, courage, and the amazing bond between humans and the animals who choose to trust us with their secrets. What would you do if you inherited something that could change the world? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we never expected to find.